Cancórla, first of all, I want to join with Deputy Kenny and the Taoiseach in extending my own sympathy and that of the Labour Party to the families of the people who have suffered the tragedies in Ballycotton and Newcastle West, and indeed to the local communities in those areas. Taoiseach, you heard from this party leader on the 30th of September 2008 when I told you that giving that blanket guarantee to the banks was handing over the deeds of the country to the banks, and now we know the truth of it. The deeds are being called in. Taoiseach, it's time to stop the pretence. All weekend we had nothing from your government and your ministers but pretence. Pretence that nothing was going on. The Minister for Justice saying it was fiction. Another minister saying nothing was happening. Another minister saying if anything was going on, he didn't know about it. When it was quite clear that the government was already engaged in discussions with European institutions in respect of some kind of bailout or assistance or whatever term you choose to apply to it now. And we're getting more of the pretence again today. We're being told it's not the state at all, it's the banks. Even though the banks and the state are now pretty much one and the same thing as a result of the guarantee. We're told it's not Ireland at all, it's the Eurozone. And we're all trying to save the Eurozone. All of that, Taoiseach, is pretence. We know that the officers of the European Union Commission are already here, that the ECB are here, that the people from the IMF are on their way. They're not coming to do their Christmas shopping. They're coming to have discussions with the government, as you put it, as you acknowledged in your reply. I will come to a question, Cancórla, please. As the Taoiseach put it in his reply to Deputy Kenny, what is the best way to provide support? What way assistance can be provided? So it's now no longer about what they are here for, but about the best way to achieve it. Now, I have a couple of questions. For you, Taoiseach, about this process, which is clearly underway and which clearly was underway even when your ministers were denying that it was underway. Can I ask you, what is on the agenda for the discussions with the European Commission, the ECB and the IMF? Who will conduct those discussions? Will those discussions be conducted at official level or at ministerial level? And if they're conducted at official level, what departments will be involved in those discussions? And can I ask you specifically, you said that you wanted to work your way through this process. Are you just going to go with the flow of this, or does the government have an objective? You said, of course, you can't predict the outcome. I accept that. You can't predict the outcome. But what you can do is you can tell us what is the intended outcome that the government intends from this process. What is your objective? What is the government's objective in this process? And what is the intended outcome that you want to achieve for this country from this? Cancórla, there will be plenty of time for the Taoiseach and I to argue about who was right and who was wrong in respect of our judgments in relation to the bank guarantee, which tied the banks to the state and which has resulted in the state being dragged into the quagmire. And we'll come back to that. But we are now in a situation, Taoiseach, where European institutions and the IMF are knocking on the door. They're on their way. And you are continuing, with the greatest of respect, to treat the Irish people as though they don't understand this. They do understand it, and they understand the significance of it. Now, what I'm trying to establish from you, Taoiseach, is what is the government's position. I've read the statement, I know why they're coming, and I can picture the kind of discussions that are likely to take place. And there's no point pretending that this is some kind of an exercise being done by a few PhD students coming here to try and establish a bit of information. This is serious stuff. Now, what I want to know, Taoiseach, is what is the government's position? I don't want this kind of general exposition that you've just given us. I want to know what is the government's position with regard to the intended outcome of these discussions. Is it the case that what is to be discussed is the provision of additional money for the banks? Is that what's being discussed? If that is what is being discussed, were we not told in September that we had got the final figure in respect of support for the banks? So is it now the case that that final figure is no longer the final figure at all? And can you give us some indication as to the extent of what the level of assistance is going to be required for the banks? And I ask that question, Taoiseach, because I'm aware that there are figures which are already in circulation in the media about the possible extent of the support which the banks require. Secondly, do you expect that there will be conditions discussed with the IMF and with the European institutions, conditions which will apply to the state, which the government and the succeeding government may have to be committed to in respect of public policy matters, in respect of budgetary matters, in return for whatever assistance is being provided for the banks? And thirdly, can you tell the House what is the government's objective? What is your intended outcome from those discussions? What are your bottom lines in respect of those discussions? And in particular, what are your bottom lines in respect of conditions that might be attached to the state? Now, it's bad enough, Taoiseach, that for the last week we've had an entire pretence from the government that this wasn't happening at all. There was going to be no discussions, there was no assistance, nobody was talking to anybody, nobody knew anything about the IMF or the EU or the ECB, or it was all fiction, according to Minister Eireann. We've had enough of that now. We know what's happening, so we want to know what is the government's position on this, what is its negotiating position, and what is the intended objective and outcome from those discussions.